Welcome everyone. I'd like to call this meeting to order at 2:04 and we'll just begin with land acknowledgement. On Tuesday, April 9th, we acknowledge that this sacred land on which Smiths Falls is now located has been a site of human activity for over 10,000 years and is rich in Indigenous history. This land is the ancestral and unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation. We are grateful to the Algonquin ancestors who cared for the land and water in order that we might meet here today. We are also grateful to the Algonquin people for their contribution in the making of the Rideau Canal, which runs through Smiths Falls. We are mindful of broken covenants and the need to reconcile with all our relations. Together, may we care for this land and each other, drawing on the strength of our mutual history of nation building through peace and friendship, being mindful of generations to come. Okay, and I'd like to move that the agenda be approved as amended there was two additional items. The first one was logos and the second one was the M2 survey.
That's right. So Peter Al had two items he wanted to bring as a priority item. He's not here right now, but we can still discuss them either way.
Okay.
Yeah.
So do I need to
Do you
move
need
that?
to second that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so Nate can second it.
So Nate
All in
seconded,
favor?
And Nate
Okay.
and Sean.
Sure.
Right, so we'll move on to 3, adoption of the minutes. So I move that the minutes of March the 12th, 2024 be approved as circulated. Moved by Nate, seconded by Peter. All in favor? Carried. Okay, perfect. And we'll move on to number 4, disclosure of monetary interest. Are there any disclosures? None noted for the minutes. And already jumping into number 5, priority issues. So, Richard, did you want to start with the new items then, or do you want to start?
Well, my item first, and
Okay.
then we can discuss other items after.
Okay,
I'm
perfect.
giving Peter some time to log on, otherwise we'll just jump right into it.
Okay.
The other Peter.
First.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we'll start with
Peter, what do we do here?
yeah. We'll start with Earth Day,
All right.
community messaging.
Mm-hmm. So Earth Day is going to be on the 22nd of April. And what I was thinking would be that we do a social media post. And I was initially thinking that we should highlight the many forests that's going to be planted later on this year. So on the 13th of April, there's going to be site work preparation. So essentially they're preparing the ground so that when it's time to plant it, it'll be already cleared away and it'll be ready. Now, the way that I wrote the first, social media messaging is indicating that we're going to be releasing the social media post, say, on Friday. But since Earth Day is on the 22nd and the main forest site preparation begins on the 13th, my suggestion is just to change, a verb so that we can highlight what happened on the 13th as opposed to promoting something that is going to happen sooner. Because it's going to be going on the 22nd, so at least it's going to be, talking about what happened on the 13th as opposed to it happening sooner. Do you guys have any ideas for what we could promote on Earth Day if you don't want to promote the mini forest?
I would just add though with the site prep is basically just adding some dirt there, so it's not particularly visual. The big exciting thing is the fact that they're going to plant all those stuff. So you could certainly make the Earth Day thing a forward-looking thing about this mini forest that's about to appear. The stage that will have already passed isn't particularly. It's just adding some dirt. Really.
Yes, that's fair. Yeah.
We also have pitch in.
Pitch in. What's that?
That's community cleanup in the parks.
Ooh.
So that Real, I think, is involved in that. Members of staff and the community can all be involved. So I think there's 2 different weekends. I think that is the first weekend. So we can confirm the dates.
Mm-hmm.
That's a good idea.
But I think it's important to, again, try and highlight some of the different things that are going to be going on sort of in conjunction with that.
Mm-hmm. I guess one thing I realized actually was that because last year was the first day that claimed it as Earth Day, so this is kind of be your second Earth Day, if that kind of makes sense. In the sense it's been on the calendar for the second time of the, and it's for us.
Okay, yeah.
Council brought it to last year, I think around April.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it was before that or not, but and again last night another proclamation certainly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I guess how much we want. I mean, we could even do social media posts leading up to it.
Mm-hmm.
I think if there's other things we want to try to highlight, so if there's other initiatives that the municipality has been involved in, let's say over the last year, or even probably featuring this group. It'd be good to have one post just talking about the climate protection working group,
Yeah.
our objectives, like just that that continued drip of information rather than just sort of one hit.
Mm-hmm.
Raising awareness about what this group's doing, I think, would be really good. I second that.
So birthday post featuring the group and the community pitch-in notice, and as well as this one. So the good ideas.
And I guess probably would be a good time to highlight the trees we plant every year. So like, check in with community services with Stephanie. Because there is, I don't know what the number is, but it's a large number of trees that the town plants every year.
This is an annual number of trees, essentially.
Yeah.
Not enough, but
I do know
we
that,
always want
actually.
more.
We never really have enough trees.
well, we're losing as many.
I know that part of my work plan is to finish the tree inventory canopy. So we sort of have this like a list of trees based on GIS mapping. So that's part of my work plan, just to finish the whole thing so we kind of have a baseline to work with.
Good.
Yeah, so that's an aside.
So there's another social media post just about that initiative, right?
Mhm.
We want to try and look at where our tree canopy is today and set objectives as to where we want to see it in the future. So like any initiatives that sort of relate to what we're doing municipally
Mhm.
to help improve our natural environment, I think are like maybe a week of different posts to try and help highlight, feature Earth Day.
Yeah, so this would be coordinated with our communication. Was it the department or is it one person? A communication team?
Department.
Department, yeah, essentially one. Yeah, so the social media posts would be coordinated with our communication department, so that we sort of have a line in terms of how the posts are being scheduled and things like that, because they would have the social media credentials to make those posts on our behalf. But I'm glad that we kind of have a focus on what we want to be promoting for Earth Day. Okay, so the next thing would be the logos. Now, when Peter mentioned this to me yesterday, it was a bit late to kind of put it together in terms of a concept, but how it goes is that if we as a committee would like to have a logo for ourselves, we'd have to come up with something and have it run through the economic development department. So essentially, Julie would have to be reviewing it and seeing it's in compliance with our policy for communication.
And Nate, you had some samples, right?
Yeah,
Provided
I
for
just took
samples?
a no guidance stab at it.
Well,
I think it's probably in keeping with it's not using any like prohibited things, but if there's any kind of feedback, we just busted that out on Canva, but we can
Oh,
make
yeah.
any kind of logo you want for sure. I just think it's the more we can make this this working group look like a real thing that's happening, that's building momentum. I think
Yeah.
some solid branding will help with just the imagery around that. But whatever it looks like, I'm not married to the design we already put forward.
Okay, I can put something together and keep redesigns, and I'll share it with our communication department once again and see what feedback is in terms of how it looks.
And if we could, I know there's been talk about rolling out a website for this project.
Yeah.
If in terms of branding and whatnot, whatever we land on for the logo and whatnot, we want a cohesive color scheme to also transfer over to the website. And so if that website needs to have the color pattern of the rest of Smiths Falls, then probably, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, so I think from what I remember, our colors for branding would be something blue, green, yellow, so kind of like those kind of colors.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if it has to be those colors, but definitely something like that.
I used the color picker, so I pulled from Smiths Falls colors with the logo, so
Smart.
it should be good.
Yeah, we have a branding guideline.
Yes.
So if we just want
Style guide, yes.
yeah, just keep it in that, would be probably within the right selection of colors and features.
So Richard, are you going to bring it back to this committee first before it goes to the economic? Or does it go there first and then come here?
Well, if we, if we bring back some samples of what works, and you guys say this works for us, and then economic development approves it, it's faster. Okay. So let's say we can bring it back to the committee next month for a discussion.
Do you have enough time to do that?
Yeah, I do. It's
Okay.
The logo shouldn't take me too long, I hope. Okay.
And just if you do have it, say in 2 weeks, don't wait till the package, because like if you send it out ahead,
You want us to circulate it?
I wouldn't mind, but
Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
I mean, if it's available, if it goes out with the package, I'm fine with that too. Like Nate, I'm not married to it.
Okay, so if it's
Married to
early,
Donna, and Nate's married to me.
okay.
Facts.
Good for me. Now, the next thing you wanted to talk about was the survey questions, but the survey isn't quite finalized yet, so there really isn't much to discuss in terms of content. But I don't know exactly where Peter wanted to take this. He was having difficulty logging in, I believe, fortunately. So, yeah.
I can take this for a second.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry, no, I was going to ask because I missed the last meeting, so I'm not sure what the survey is all about.
So we can discuss it.
So in the last meeting, something that I flagged was that the sequence of events, the milestones that are spelled out in the system, it's a coherent series of events, but it seemed to me like the process of going and reaching out to everybody, to the public, before we'd done any homework in terms of what menu of options is available to us, it just seemed premature, and that rather than just getting how much are you freaked out about climate change, it might be a more constructive conversation to present a variety of different options for things that we can do and get some specific feedback on those things. And since that was discussed in the last meeting, in the intervening time, I sent over a list of technical questions about establishing the baseline. And Richard was kind enough to go through and answer all of them pretty much, which I'm hugely grateful for. Thank you. I think he wants to touch on that, but one of the main takeaways from that series of technical questions was almost everything that we might do to mitigate our carbon footprint affects the initial inventory. So that what we're calling the first milestone, requires a great deal of preparation before we officially declare what those are. And for example, the tree thing, if we want to take credit for planting trees in Smiths Falls and show that is lowering our carbon footprint, we need to complete the tree inventory before that first milestone. Same with most of the different aspects of our carbon footprint. We don't need to commit to a specific mitigation effort, but we need an ideation session where we've listed the various options, because the door will be closed to doing them if we wait until after the first milestone. I don't know if that makes sense.
I understand.
You need a starting point.
Yeah, and I just in the last meeting we were just kind of uncertain about what the rules were, and is that allowable? And having done a bunch more research and looked at the work product of other groups like ours, my new sense is that this is like building a building, where the first milestone is breaking ground, but before you break ground, you better have an architect that has a pretty clear idea of everything that's happening. You know what I mean? There's a lot of prep work that goes into that before we do that first milestone. Anyway, that's my rant.
And how will this survey be distributed, circulated, assessed?
So the survey is the second milestone. And the idea is that the survey is how we're gauging the public's interest in combating climate change. And so in terms of the putting one foot in front of the other, eventually we're going to need a survey that says how do you feel about planting trees? How do you feel about, lowering your thermostat? How do you, whatever the different menu of options we want to present. But prior to that milestone, which is the second milestone, we need to conceive of what those various options might be, get a ballpark idea of what our footprint is and how much we can affect it by the different mitigation methods. And our team needs to have some sense of that before we pull the trigger on the first milestone, or it will be too late to do the things that we want to do, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and it's coming back to me, that conversation, and I agreed with you then, and I do now. Otherwise, we're just asking residents, stuff we probably already, what percentage feel like climate change is important. But what we'd rather do is come back and say, in our strategy, we've got a list of, we've identified 30 things that the town could do. how would you rank them? Or these will cost impact on you. How would you rank? And then we take that and that advises how we go forward.
Well, I think we should look at, I guess, begin with the end in mind. What do we want to accomplish out of this?
Mhm.
And if we want to come back with actionable items that we can, as a committee, make recommendations to council to follow through on. So as an example, are we going to assess, do you own an EV? Do you plan on owning an EV? What are the barriers between why you don't own an EV? Do you think more public chargers are necessary? If so, like where? Or how do you currently heat your home? And
Right.
do you plan on converting to a new heat source in the future? And again, when and what are the barriers? Are you aware of certain grants? Like all these things, I think if we're looking at the community, I guess both corporate and community inventory, we probably get some ideas as to what we can do corporately to reduce our carbon footprint. But probably even the bigger one, of course, is community-wide. And if we see, I guess, obstructions that may prevent people from making changes, whether they are real or simply perceived, I think it's important that it would even help guide our decisions down the road on public education or workshops, or else we could do.
Definitely.
But we don't have that list yet of options. And so that's what needs.
And in turn, so just circling back to what that list of options looks like and the process of developing that list. Just an example from the previous meeting. We're talking about the process of modeling the climate impacts of various different actions, and the two scenarios that we talked about in the previous meeting. One of them was retrofitting the sewage system, because that's one of our largest footprints. And another idea that was talked about was implementing like a type of mass transit system. And the thing I said at the meeting was that my instincts on the math is that it's going to be significantly cheaper to retrofit a sewage system than it would be to implement a mass transit system, because the mass transit system is an ongoing expense, whereas the sewage system is a one-time fix and then it's just lower. The thing, when I went home and actually tried to do the modeling around that, it occurred to me that that's missing one important point, which is that if council is already excited about doing a transit system, as an example, or I'm sure there's a million different versions of this, but if there's already something that there's a political appetite for non-climate change reasons, then in the accounting of what we can do and not do, like maybe the transit thing, if the council wanted to do that anyways, maybe that would go down as almost free. Whereas the sewage thing, the only real benefit is the increased efficiency. So like I can help with the modeling in terms of like this is how much money it'll cost to reduce our footprint by that much if we do this. But in terms of a sense of like what actually makes sense for the town, this really needs to be led by council, because council is the one that ran on different public programs and they have ideas about what they do and don't want to do. Like almost all of these infrastructure things are going to be decisions that council needs to make, right? Like,
yes. So really, if it's in our strat plan,
yeah,
which we've already endorsed, that would be the.
So basically, every single one of these has major climate change implications, and so I haven't spoken with all of council on this subject, but my sense is that every member of council has certain aspects of that they're more or less passionate about, ones that they want to lean into and whatnot. And because council needs to approve whatever we're going to do, it would be helpful in preparing the list of options to hear from them on like for instance, just as an example, the mass transit thing. My sense is that council has probably at least explored a little bit of that option. I know there's I have no idea whether they looked at it and said, this is way too much money, it's not an option, or yes, we should lean into this. And if there's an appetite to lean into it, then we could certainly hold a public info session about the different options for that. We could try to get some public support. If on the back end that if town staff is there just isn't the money for this, we're not about to have the money for this, it would be nice, but it's not really an option, there's no sense in wasting all of our time trying to build public support for something that can't happen. You know what I mean? Like, it would be nice if council gave us some suggestions on what of these projects they want to lean into and what they don't.
So you want council support first before we go to the public?
We don't need council to say that, like, this is what we want rubber stamped. But if there's certain things that they've investigated that they've already decided aren't going to work, or they've already decided they very much want to make happen, that, you know, and what we're doing here in scoring all of these different civil projects and whatnot, it's kind of like the climate lens program, which is used for, like, if you're going to build a building, you're supposed to view it through a climate lens. But this group is supposed to do that with every one of these projects. With, you know, like, what would it affect our climate footprint if we did have electric vehicle chargers? How would it affect it if we were to make a rule that the, like, new building developments didn't have gas heat? Like, there's a bunch of things that have been kind of thrown out there as possibilities, but in terms of what their impacts are going to be, right? Like, we should be, I think we need to model those impacts.
Yeah, I think this group can act quite independently of council, but recognizing council is the ultimate approval authority. And so I think if it's something that fits with the strat plan, you build a case for it. When it comes to public transit, there's been, I think, interest in that for multiple terms of council. We've never fully investigated it or costed it. There's a rural transportation working group right now that's going to do a feasibility study for Leonard County and Smith Falls. We've contributed a little bit of money towards that. And that would get us between communities as well as hopefully within our community. Of course, the other factor is cost, but cost could also be mitigated through gas tax as well as federal provincial grants. So I think if it's something if we believe that was a very necessary action to reduce our carbon footprint, I know the Smith Falls for All committee would be thrilled with the possibility of having public transit, trying to meet the needs of our community, especially the 20% of our community who don't have access to a vehicle. There's a lot of layers to this. I would say it's very positive. If it came down to $1 million a year, then council will have to make the decision. I say $1 million a year, probably not going to happen. But I think it'd be a matter of building that case, and here's the rationale reasons why it would be important to do so. So I don't think we necessarily have to we can do an interim report, let's say, of priorities and plans, objectives, and take that to council. If there is some absolute rejection of some of the concepts or objectives, then that might be the end of it. But I think until things are, it'd be up to this group to sort of build that business case.
Okay, I love that. I love that. In terms of building the business cases for these different options, because in our first milestone, we're supposed to get our baseline of what our footprint is, and like I was saying, like almost every aspect of this has implications for that modeling. In terms of a budget for creating that initial baseline. Is that the discretion of town? Yeah, like, is that the discretion of council? Is that the discretion of town staff? Like in your own mind, are we spending $1,000 on this? 10,000, 100,000? Like,
so how I envisioned it is that we would create the survey. You would have a menu of options that we're looking at, and it would kind of create a scenario that we want that would be most likely for Smith Falls, and we kind of put a report together saying, okay, these are the recommendations, this is the scenario, and these are your options. You're either going to go with a modest or, not so modest or super intense, and we're going to, achieve high reductions in our emission reduction targets. So once we do that, where we kind of give them the 3 main options and the scenarios based on that, then we can have a better understanding of what's realistic. I haven't really put a financial number on it yet because the conversation about finances hasn't come up yet.
Yeah, and fair enough. I guess it just, in terms of the putting one foot in front of the other, my initial understanding was that we weren't going to try to create that list of options until we've done some assessment of our carbon footprint, because we don't really get to know the impact until, but that first milestone of assessing our footprint, for example, like in the past 2 meetings, we've discussed how much cars are driven in Smith Falls and trying to put a number on that. There was 2 different potential sources of data on that. One of them is more likely to be accurate because it's based on actual driving in Smiths Falls, but it's outdated by a few years. And then the other source is less accurate because it's based on gasoline sales, but it's up to date. In a perfect world with enough money, we would buy both data sets so we can look at the one and create a per capita footprint there, and then compare that per capita footprint to the per capita footprint from gas sales. And if we look at gas sales and it creates a footprint that's twice the size of the other one, we know that's way off.
Right.
If they get to pretty close to the same place, that tells us something. That's just one example of like there's probably 100 different data sets that we're going to need to either acquire or make or research in order to get the first milestone done.
That's right.
So like, if we spend $1,000 on one, maybe not such a big deal. If we spend $1,000 on 100 of them, it starts to add up to real money real quickly.
Right.
And some of these things, the choice of whether we want to quantify it at all is going to come to a financial one. Like an example, the amount of methane and nitrous oxide the town puts out. We aren't currently measuring that. It's a real thing. It would be lovely to quantify that. If we're able to show a reduction, like for nitrous oxide, you get 300 to 1 return. So if we can show that we reduced 1 ton of nitrous oxide, we get credited for 300 tons of CO2. So like huge return on that, but the only way we get to get credited for that is if we do an analysis and establish our baseline beforehand, which would be like the first milestone. So I think we're going to need to go to council or whoever to get some kind of an operating budget for the purpose of quantifying our footprint before we can even do this process of getting into the possible solutions.
So I know that Enbridge, they have a municipal incentive fund. So that's something that we'll be able to apply for if you're looking to, explore those avenues. So essentially that gives us 50% of whatever the cost would be for any sort of exploration project we're looking at.
Yes.
So that's available to us. But I guess in terms of funding from other sources, that's unclear at this point.
Okay, that's okay.
Now, we've already partnered with the county to leverage
Yes.
county specialty staff
Right.
knowledge,
Yes.
right?
That's
And
some of
assistance.
Yes, that's done.
When it comes to developing milestone 1, they've already done it for the county. So they already have the methodologies in place. So I'm not sure how much cost will be attached to us getting the information we need to create milestone 1.
So I was speaking with Elizabeth. Elizabeth's the person who I speak with when I do with the county.
Mm-hmm.
And so, for example, when it came to the transportation, they were able to show us the methodology that they used. And they told me that, if we're going to go to vehicles kilometers traveled, that would be more accurate, but more expensive. So in terms of the, if we're going to maintain this data set every couple of years, there's a cost attached to it as opposed to using the gas sales. So yeah, they've been helpful in sharing the methodology and their expertise. And they're also helping us with the survey.
But they're not actually able to provide us the data, right? Like they can offer assistance.
There's some data that we can use based on the data that they've taken from, but for example, for the transportation data, I don't know how much of it would be useful for us, but I can definitely inquire and see what similarities in data that we have, but that they use, so we can reduce our costs in looking for other sources of data elsewhere. And
the FCM program, Partners for Climate Protection, does have guidance as well. So I think a lot of what we need, at least for milestone 1, is probably available, fairly available. Again, I think it's somewhat subjective in contrast to paying for more, maybe more accurate data, but I'm not sure how much closer it gets us to a different baseline. Or put it all together, hopefully we're where we need to be.
So I was speaking with someone from Clean Air Partnership because they would be the company who would be helping us with transportation data, for example. Mm-hmm. And one thing that the guy was mentioning is that we shouldn't be bogged down too much on the specific data. Like data is important, but in terms of the actual outcome, we're still trying to reduce our usage either way. So the actions and the incentives that we're trying to get everyone to buy into, this still matter regardless of what the data actually says. The data is important, but we're still trying to get everyone to reduce. We're still trying to get everyone to change their habits. So that's still something we're driving, even though we may not have the most accurate data available.
And so on that subject, agreed that you don't want to make the great the enemy of the good, and to the extent that like less perfect data is better than no data at all, and it creates really big holes when you leave spaces missing. So another issue that we need to settle before the initial milestone is a question of scope. And there's 3 different scope options that's available to us. And what that basically means is in terms of how the town accounts for its carbon footprint, are we keeping it strictly to the emissions that happen within the town barriers, or is it the carbon footprint of the citizens? And one of the biggest differences there is food. Like one of the biggest carbon footprints that we have is our food supply system. And so if we use the first metric, we don't count food at all. And that's allowed, but there's also a version with the third scope does look at food, it looks at garbage waste, it makes a much more complete picture of your carbon footprint, but that requires more data. And there's Richard was kind enough to track down examples of municipalities that have taken the plunge and done the third scope, and he shared with me BC and Toronto, which had opposite approaches. One was a top down and one was a bottom up. And the data that they produced, literally one was almost twice the other. Like BC's understanding of the carbon footprint by usage, food accounted for 48%. In Toronto, it's like 20%. And the reality is it's probably the same number or very close to the same number. It's just the methodology that they used for counting it. But in terms of guidance from council and whatnot, the choice to go with quantifying food, like going with the third scope, I think there's a really strong argument that we should be ambitious in terms of trying to capture the full carbon footprint of the town. But that's going to mean we have a significantly larger carbon footprint that we need to try to mitigate. It means that we're going to be either hiring a consultant to do the food portion or try to muddle through it ourselves. Like it's just something that needs to be considered. And I don't know, is that something that our group has the authority to do? Is that something council has the authority to do?
Well, whatever is in the budget for this year for 2024 is what we have to work with for 2024.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd say we would want to follow the methods that we can work within the capacity we have available today. If we're going to go beyond that, it's probably a consideration of the 2025 budget.
Mm-hmm.
So when it comes to developing milestone 1, I don't think we don't want to wait until 2025 to do that. So I think to your comment, we don't want great to get in the way of good.
Yeah.
And so I think we follow the methodologies that most or all other municipalities under the Partners for Climate Protection Program have followed. And so leveraging Elizabeth's talents from the county, as well as Richard, I think we can probably come up with what is fair and reasonable. Because I think the ultimate outcome is not necessarily, we want to be able to measure progress in the future, but more importantly is progress.
Yeah.
And a milestone, we'll have our baseline, but I think it's very important that we come up with the actions that are going to lead to a reduction in our carbon footprint. We'll measure that. Somebody will measure that in the future, but what's most important though is the actions that are going to get us there.
So for that, I would say we should definitely do scope 3, because scope 3 includes food. So the choice, if we just instead of eating beef, eat chicken, not even going vegetarian, just switching from beef to chicken, cuts the carbon footprint from food in half. It's one of the only aspects of this where personal actions can actually make a pretty big difference. If we want to, there's not a lot we can do to shrink our carbon footprint from driving other than encouraging some people to get EVs. But the thing of planting, carbon farming off-site, that's only if we're doing the first scope, we can't count that because it's only within town limits. So only the trees we plant in town. Whereas if we do the third scope, we can carbon farm outside of town and count it towards our own baseline. So there's significantly more that can be done if we go with the third scope. It doesn't have, if there just isn't money in the bank to do that, to pay for consultants, I would say let's just it's better to get the number not great, but at a place where we can at least account for it. For instance, Toronto was one of the municipalities that did decide to go with scope 3. They've got 3 million people in it. We can divide their number by 3 million and then times it by our population. Boom, we did it. It didn't cost anything. We just literally if you look at how Toronto did it, They basically did that with the states. They took like a bunch of US statistics and just applied it to Canada, even though it's not a great thing. But by doing that, even if the number isn't on the nose accurate, at least now, if we can show that people are eating less beef, or we found a way to reduce methane outputs, and it's shrinking our carbon footprint. But yeah, so I don't know if we have the authority to decide that now or if that's a future thing. But in terms of the scope, I would definitely encourage us to do a scope 3.
Okay.
Here.
It's a great discussion. And when we put the budget together for this last year, we didn't have this kind of
Discussion
insight or
and-
information. Because I'm thinking it's a few things around money. One, I don't want to wait till next year.
Yeah.
If getting a sense of an additional cost, at least going that far and saying, all right, let's say we want to do scope 3, we're going to not cheap, but we're going to go cheap on some things, but there is going to be an additional $20,000 to get this data. Then I'm prepared to go back to council or staff and say, a pre-budget approval almost for, because it needs to be spent now. If we have it next year, we won't need it because this is our baseline. So some way, but at least finding out what that cost is and then having the discussion and say, this is why, because I think, I didn't know what to think going into this, but I'm sure some of my colleagues thought we could do this for $5,000 share with the county, but we didn't know that.
Yeah.
And I don't think we can, hearing that now. So maybe there's something in between.
And there is a DIY option with almost all of this. It's like what I just described with the Toronto's thing. With the one version is we're just doing a per capita unit measurement from another city and applying it to us. There's another version of it where we go to the schools and say, does any school want to do a project where pick 100 families and you guys carefully document what everyone's eating, and then we extrapolate from there. We could tap community involvement for a bunch of these, same with the driving stuff.
There's a cost to that too.
100%. And there's and a time.
Richard will be working full time on this project.
Oh, no, for sure.
It adds up a lot, but I would be in terms of a guiding principle, I would say the more that we can accurately assess the entire footprint, not ignore certain pieces of it, we're way better off. The food example is one of the key ones. Is most municipalities went with scope 1 because it's easier. Most municipalities, only a handful even attempted what I'm saying we should attempt. And you can see how, I don't think we even really contemplated it here. And you can see how most municipalities would just kind of gravitate towards the first one. But when considering the sum total of this is the entirety of what Canada is doing for climate change, if every municipality ignores food footprint, but we go out to rural areas, so the country still has to quantify how much methane their cows are producing, we skew the data, and suddenly there's a huge incentive to import food. Beef we import from China has no carbon footprint according to that record system, whereas beef from the farm down the street has a huge carbon footprint. And it's not immediately obvious, but there's so many downstream implications if you ignore a certain data set. And so my strongest advice here is just do our best to quantify everything, even if we're not going to do a perfect job of it. Don't intentionally ignore a certain part of our carbon footprint because you don't know what's going to happen.
I agree. I think we want to incorporate everything.
Yeah, about 6 years ago, Earth Day, I did share a YouTube basically on this topic. And probably I will try to locate that and share with everybody. Food is definitely one. And in fact, from that documentary, one of the recommended one with the lowest carbon footprint was that of the Mediterranean diet. And I did look into the different aspects of, food and carbon footprint. So I'll do that sharing, yeah. Excellent. It may put things in the right context. Okay, yeah.
But, all right, so if we agree to do this, that's a project in itself, like just designing scope 3, what can we buy, what can we borrow, and what can we just
Take.
extrapolate, and by when, and who's going to do it, and then we come up with a cost, and we've set this, then we can come back, our next update to council is, 1, there's an additional cost maybe, 2, we've scoped it out, and 3, this is what our deliverables are going to be.
Mhm.
So, but that has to be done.
I can do that for the next meeting if you like. Just like a modeling of like just extrapolate using the top down BC and the bottom up Toronto, get both of those populations and convert it to Smiths Falls, and just like, even if that number is like, even if we know that those numbers are not particularly accurate, good enough for this phase. Like, just, you know, we can circle back and do a more detailed thing down the road too.
So wait, I need to clarify something. So are we discussing exploring scope 3 and the requirements to do scope 3? Is that what we're discussing?
I think, if I don't want to put words in his mouth, but I'm hearing everyone forming a consensus that we want to do scope 3. I don't know if we need to vote on that, but
Well, I'm not,
Yeah.
sorry, Madam Chair, I haven't seen this, what's in each scope yet either. I'm relying a little bit on Nate, but you know, I'm assuming there's the basic model, there's the next, and then there's the most comprehensive model. And
exactly, it's just scales of, and the key differentiator is geography. Like scope 1 ends at the town's edges,
right,
whereas scope 3 looks at the impact of the town's community writ large.
Right.
Beyond our borders.
Yeah.
and by going a little bit later than a lot of communities, we've learned this, and so that's why we're looking at it now. If, you know, if I was starting 8 years ago, it would have been great, but we probably would have done that really not rudimentary, but basic, right?
And so the organization of People for Climate Change, is that the C? I'm dyslexic. I always mess up the acronyms, but they have a guide for doing this for small and rural communities. Like I don't know if you guys have read it, but I found it online, and it touches on different like approaches. It talks about all of these different things. And so like that is a fantastic resource for everything that we're doing.
And you can reach out to that.
Nice. Yeah.
So that's, I guess, I don't know if you have that information.
Oh yes, I do. I'm familiar with the guide.
So if Nate's going to quarterback this, then why don't we plan to have a decision on this next meeting?
Yeah. So we can I can bring
So we can do all the homework and the time to do the homework between now and then.
I think they don't have to coordinate.
Okay.
And what I can do is I can bring a report to the committee that kind of evaluates what all the scopes are and tells you what's different about scope 3 and what the advantages of going through this process. And then we won't be able to get costing for you obviously by next month, but we can definitely explore options. The costing can come after that.
Here. I was just going to say, I don't want to lose the conversation either that we had around the strat plan, because I think that's going to be really helpful in the business case portion.
So harmonize with the strat plan?
I don't know, with the scopes, will the strat plan strategies or interventions, do they cover some of the things that you're talking about in scope 3, or just because if...
I think basically everything is covered. I guess the one other aspect of scope 3 is waste. That there's both the like solid municipal waste like garbage and also sewage and whatnot.
There's an RFP up for updating that, so it's something that Public Works has been working on for some time.
There is a few items within our vision which speak to it. Certainly, pursuing environmental sustainability and climate adaptation, creating healthy community, quality of life for our residents. What was it? Another one here I thought.
Well, investing in our infrastructure.
That's right. Yeah.
Because I think
marginalized people move out of poverty is also obviously a factor of climate change too.
And I know there's a lot of talk about affordable housing. Affordable food food has gotten crazy expensive. I know that's a big pressing issue. One of the arguments for scope 3 is suddenly the food supply chain becomes politics, and there's suddenly a lot of the things that we might do to lower our carbon footprint can also make food more affordable. There's also a bunch of interest in different the guaranteed minimum income plans, and some of those are writing checks, but a lot of what they're looking at is providing resources like food, to the extent that we could propose systems that do that in a way that's sustainable. Canada's spending a lot of money trying to find ways to meet their climate goals. And if we can present options that will address like housing and food costs and also shrink our carbon footprint, I could see getting funding for it.
Exactly. I think there'll be a better appetite for that, right? Even around the council table, I'm sure, right? You've already agreed to the strategic plan. We already value this. And so it's just giving it a different name.
I like that.
And I also wonder too whether the health unit has been doing something about food as well.
Yes, we do a lot around food security. So
Right.
one of our dietitians actually, she does a nutritious food basket report
Okay.
every year. So
Right.
we have lots of data around
Right,
the
right.
cost of food.
And whether that sort of data could be just like the climate lands, we can then start looking back with that sort of lands and be able to reflect on the carbon footprint and so on. So in that case, there basically we are collaborating rather than breaking new ground, right?
That's good.
Any other comments on that? Sorry, Richard.
One thing I was going to add is
I'm not used to this.
I was going to say that when it comes to like affordable food and food security, one thing that we could do in terms of, I guess, recommendations when we do create our climate action plan would be to provide space so we can have a community garden, for example. That's one way that we can have it somewhat affordable. So there is some tie-in if we're going to include scope 3. I guess it would take some work to figure out what that really means for us.
But in the end, it's much more medieval.
I agree.
And this is not a sprint.
No, it's not a race.
The greenhouse gases are invisible, but they're not imaginary. And I think like that's something I like try to remind myself of over and over again, because like the exercise that we're doing is trying to quantify something that really is there. And so like these numbers can kind of feel like we're making this up as we go along because it's all over the place. And like the more like it's part of the reason why I think it's so important that we do scope 3, so that it's not just, well, we've decided to count some and not others. It's like we're really trying to get the actual number of how many greenhouse gases we're emitting.
Okay, thanks, Nate. So Nate, you're able to
Yeah, I can.
the scope
I'll do the.
3
I can do the
for
food
next
modeling.
meeting?
Yeah.
Okay,
We'll coordinate, so we'll have something.
great. Okay, are we ready to move on?
Yes, we are.
Okay, so 7 project updates. The first one is climate change action plan, milestone 1 follow-up questions.
Yes, so there were 2 questions that came up from last meeting that I wanted to address so that we can move on. So one was the waste and sewage values breakdown, because I know there's a big question about like what the number really means and where it's all coming from. So I decided to do that for you guys. So that's like the total number when it comes to the greenhouse gas emissions in terms of energy. So that's how much energy that sector is using. It's hard to read, unfortunately, but that's really what I'm trying to say in terms of how much energy the waste and water is using.
This is the municipality.
This is the municipality, yes. So it talks to it's all our facilities. So our
Right.
treatment plants and our waste pumps.
And we haven't got waste in there yet, but
So this is also the emissions. So it's also one of the highest emitters in terms of the overall baseline data. So this hasn't changed since the last meeting. This is just a
Right.
refresher. And here now is a breakdown. It looks at all the, it's hard to read. So the first one would be the wastewater treatment plant. And that's one of the bigger ones.
Yeah.
And the second one would be the water treatment plant. So those are the ones that are one of the bigger energy users, cost the most, as well as one of the bigger energy emissions as well.
Can I just interrupt for 1 second? One of the takeaways from here, we were trying to sort, like the water and sewage is our biggest footprint right now, and we were trying to sort where the specifics of where that's coming from. Looking at this data set, the pump stations are not the problem. They are a rounding error.
Yes.
What we have is there's 2 wastewater treatment plants
Yes.
that each collectively, like combined, are our largest footprint, but they're only a little bit above the water treatment. So the input and output are almost neck and neck with each other. The input is slightly below the output, which suggests to me that we are not looking at the methane or the nitrous oxide coming off, because like I don't think that's being quantified in this. which would be a bigger number than any of those. So
Yeah.
like we're missing the biggest number.
So
on
just
that
how the
list.
PCP tool does the calculation.
Yeah. But I think that that's probably just electricity, right?
It's electricity and gas.
But not the gas from the decomposition of the waste, just
No,
heating
it's
gas.
not.
It's just the
It's just
natural
natural
gas.
gas.
Yeah.
So like all of this is really
Yeah.
just the hydro bill and the Enbridge bill. So that's kind of how where the numbers and values are coming from.
Is it possible to find out whether it's an Enbridge bill or like whether we're talking about electricity or like it's a pelletizer, right? Is that thing using natural gas or is that using
Natural gas.
it's using natural gas? Okay, so most of this energy is coming from fossil fuels.
Well, I don't know.
Yeah,
My guess is it's probably electricity.
I don't.
Well, on carbon footprint, I think the cost may be more evenly split, but the actual carbon emissions would be much higher with
Yeah.
gas we're consuming, right?
I would. This was another topic of the previous conversation. Our electricity grid in Smiths Falls. Richard was able to track down a number. According to this, we're just using the average from the whole province. So if we actually had a location specific thing, it would be even more the case. But even on a province wide level, 90% of electricity is carbon neutral. It's mostly nuclear. There's some wind, very little solar. But what it means is like if you have a 100-watt light going in here, 90 of those watts is carbon neutral. It's only 10 watts that's actually coming from a fuel source. So and that's getting phased out. Like because we have a 10-year time horizon here, it's like over the next 10 years, it's likely that number is going to go down significantly. So like the power generation portion of this, there's not really a lot we can do as a municipality other than encouraging the province to move that last 10%. But in general, like we want to try to move everything from gas to electric. Like it's it's like the measurement that does the kilojoules or gigajoules isn't a particularly useful metric for us because most of that's carbon neutral, and we're actually trying to make that number go up, not down.
We can also get the split. That's easy enough.
Yeah.
You have both numbers to put the two together, right? So it's easy to.
Yeah, and then the third number, which should be the biggest, is the methane and nitrous oxide actually coming from the sewage itself, which is bigger. It's going to be the largest of the sewage things, I would think.
Mm-hmm. So the next slide kind of breaks it down in more granular detail, so you can just see in terms of numbers. It's easy to read that way. So there's two different accounts for the same place. So that's why it was split that way in terms of the data, but you can assume that this is basically one in terms of the account. So like they're assumed as one, but in terms of the different accounts, they're just two separate accounts. So for the wastewater, for total energy consumption for one of them is 34.5 of the total waste and sewage values. In terms of emissions, it's 21%. And in terms of total expenditures, 48%. So essentially, it's rather costly. Now, what I did look up actually, so the wastewater treatment facility is a class 4 nitrifying treatment process. That's what it's called. And the energy used in the class 4 nitrifying treatment to activate the sludge plants can be quite significant. So that's the main issue here is that essentially the treatment process is energy intensive. So for us to really address this as an issue, we'd have to find a way to either have a different treatment process or a new plant. Now I don't know what's more cost effective or in our interest to change at this time, but that's just what we're looking at.
Both are going to be spendy. There's a bunch of like really exciting projects that are happening where municipalities are using the waste, like, I was saying the biggest footprint is the gases coming off. There's municipalities that are capturing those gases and using it to reduce heating costs. It's like it takes a problem and turns it into a solution. That's not cheap, but it's like technologically it's not that complicated either. Like it's basically putting a plastic bag over the pits and stuff, and as the methane comes up, it requires like a little bit of upcycling to get cleaned up so that it can be put into the grid. But a bunch of municipalities are making natural gas out of their sewage.
Interesting.
We just had a conversation on our wastewater plant. we invest every year a lot of money into keeping it up. Those wastewater and water treatment are the most highly regulated. We're told right down to this kind of screw you need to use.
Wow.
And every time you move, you have to document it. It's highly, like the reports we got on those are 200 pages of detail, and the province regulates it. So we are investing every year, 50 to 100,000 in. And I asked at the last time we're putting this money in, if we keep doing this, this plant will last forever. So switching out to another plant probably is not viable at our cost.
But
capturing
retrofitting
it, capturing the methane, or getting totally off the gas, because I just don't. You're talking 50 million or 75 million for a new.
But a retrofit might be something.
And so right now we're drying out the sewage and then pelletizing it so that it can be used on farmers' fields. I think that
giving it away.
Yeah, the idea, like Ottawa did the same thing, and they thought that they would be selling it, and it didn't end up that there was a market for it. It could be that same facility, just a different treatment process, where rather than trying to pull out all the water, we put it into a pond where we're capturing the methane. And like, even if we're not capturing all of it, if we're not using a bunch of energy to do that, I don't know. It's certainly, because it's one of our biggest footprints, it's something that we should look further at, and we should definitely talk to the guy that runs it. And at least find out if they have the equipment to measure methane and nitrous oxide. Because if they have that equipment, for one, we can use that equipment to measure fluxes around town. If they don't, then we need to rent that equipment or something if we want to quantify it.
Peter?
We have one of the best water treatment and wastewater treatment managers in the province, in my opinion, and I believe that. And unfortunately, in the middle of May, he's taking a big new job. So if we want to get information, get him now, because he's a very forward-thinking, really dynamic person.
Can we invite him to one of these meetings? Like, I know we talked about doing a bunch, we have a lot of questions for him.
Sure. What is?
It's May. He's in May.
Next meeting.
But he'll take holidays.
Yeah. It may be too late, unfortunately.
Unless anyways, we should.
Or can we just take him out to lunch or something?
Yeah.
I'm sure
Any answers?
Yeah.
I guess if we plan to meet earlier than we schedule, maybe it's possible.
Well, if we want to check him on his availability and see, we can always move up a whole special meeting, maybe.
Yeah.
Tell him we want to give him a special send off.
Yeah.
All we need is brain before he leaves.
No, he is.
Or include lunch. Okay.
Yeah.
We'll have a little Q&A.
Yeah.
Okay, so the next slide essentially was going over the use for the water treatment facility. So that's the other one. That's one of the higher energy users. Yeah, so 45% of the total energy consumption comes from this facility, and 47% of the greenhouse gas emissions, and 44% of the total energy expenditure. So this is one of the other big expensive energy users. So those two facilities would be, I guess, their key focus in trying to reduce their energy consumption for the waste and sewage values. The other question the committee was asking about was, why were the numbers looking so easy to read in terms of the 12% increase per year? And what I was told was that the PCP tool uses the basic business as usual calculation that scales emissions, so that population appears to be growing every year. So that's why it looks like it's growing at the same rate. So just basically the methodology that the PCP tool uses to calculate the business as usual forecast. And our growth rate as defined by the land use study is 1.13%. But that land use study was looking at a 50-year projection instead of say 10 years. So I'm not quite sure if the number in terms of our growth rate will change if we're looking at 10 years as opposed to 25.
Mm-hmm. And our growth rate, in the past census, it was the first census where we grew, right, for a long time.
Yeah.
And those happen every 5 years, right?
Four.
Yeah. So we could look at that growth rate over 4 years and make a projection over 10. Pretty straightforward, right? So
yeah, I guess.
Because like, there's no point in pretending we're going to grow 12% a year. Like, for one, we'll look at 100% growth by the time this time.
We're aiming for 2040, 2030. What's the year though for the Canada when we have?
We're supposed to be neutral by 2050. PEI set it for 2040, and they're setting it. They want to get down to 50% by, I think it's 2030. That's the biggest near term deadline. Is the
2040, 2050. So I just wonder about that as our period.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if the number will change if I change the growth. If I change the growth rate, then the values will change. So I'll see what I can do in terms of extrapolating based on the StatCan data.
So I guess, so back to water, wastewater.
Yes.
So as an example, if Jason was here today, he'd be able to tell us that the amount of non-revenue water that they've been able to reduce the last couple of years. So part of the carbon footprint of a water treatment plant is the volume of water you need to treat. So at one point, yes, it's created a lot more efficiency. At one point in time, which 2/3 of the water we were producing wasn't being built. Some of it goes out hydrant flushing, but a lot of it was just going into the ground with leaks. So the more infrastructure work we do, the more repairs we do on leaks makes a difference. Also on the wastewater side, we're treating stormwater. Almost all the stormwater in town goes through the wastewater treatment plant. Now, when we do sewer separation, like we did on Beckwith, like we'll do on George, like we did on Catherine, the more we can reduce the flows in there, obviously the less energy we need to treat wastewater as well. So there's all these, it's not just work that happens within the facilities, it's the things that can happen to try and
upstream.
Yeah. That's a way of saying it.
Way to go, Peter. That's a good one.
Okay, that works for me, yes. In terms of next steps, so we're going to be completing the community emissions inventory and creating a survey. The survey won't be ready until the end of May, as well as setting the values for the corporate and the community emission targets. So we'll create the survey and then the values will be set much later. And for the communication plan, just a bit of an update, not that it's pertinent. So the communication plan is in draft form. It's being reviewed by the communications departments. And we have an external stakeholders list that we're kind of drafting that would be going out for people who are interested in the survey or updates about the communication plan or the climate action plan. And the next thing would be to create a page for the town page as well as draft the survey.
Excellent. On this, in terms of the community interaction piece of it, when we get the website, it would be really helpful if like all of the different literature that we're reviewing is there. So like, because like it's the talking to the public and getting feedback from the public, like we're not going to do a man on the street interview where they solve the climate crisis. What we really want is for them to look at the project that we're working on and offer, you know what I mean? Like if there was even like 10 or 20 people from the public that bothered to read the like guide to doing this and actually looked at what we thought our carbon footprint was and what the different options were, those people's feedback could be like really helpful. You know what I'm saying? Like it's like to the extent that we can find partners in the community that want to actually participate in a meaningful way, like, but for that we need to provide them with the documents that we're working on.
It will be there. Yeah. So like how I envision I guess our page would be discussing what's next. Like the first thing would be the more important things people need to read. And if you're looking for, I guess, some interesting documents, be like those accordion files. So basically click the link and there'd be different links underneath here. So you want to find more information, you click here, click here, click here. So that's all basically in one location. Yeah. So that people can find everything they need to find.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Peter?
Yeah, and I don't know whether we have a chance to discuss about the county survey. No, okay. Because when I look at that survey there, it's like opinion about you do this and so on and so forth. It's when you ask people about different things without a database, it is useless. Mm-hmm. Because, should I save my money to buy an electric car or should I get a solar water heater? Which one is more effective? So we need those things. Yeah. And I think we do need to have that when you get the public into choices, provide that option. It's a good chance for education, right? Yeah. So my 2 cents here.
While we're on communication, when do we have a time that we want to have a report or to council?
That's on my list. That was the next slide, but yeah.
Oh, sorry. Michelle.
No, it's a good
Look ahead of
question.
us.
It's a good question. So essentially, these are like the touch points that we would be communicating mostly. So Earth Day is one that we discuss. When the survey comes out at the end of May, that'd be quite important. When the M1 is completed in terms of the emissions inventory, that'd be announced. When you're completing M2, and when we're doing a public open house for the action plan. So that's sort of like the project timeline I'm working with. So that's kind of where we are right now in terms of the work that we're doing. And this sort of breaks down the timeline in terms of the work. So the green would be M1, we're still here. So we're going to be finishing the community emissions inventory data set. And there will be a report when the milestone 1 is completed. So that will go to you guys. And then we're looking at number 2, which is M2, which would be the blue. So that's when we're talking about drafting the survey. The plan that I think would work best is if we have the survey once it's drafted, open for 3 months. So basically the length of the summer, so that people can have the chance to review the documents, make up their minds, answer the survey, that sort of thing. And then once the survey is done, we evaluate the data, and then they report about the emission reduction evaluation targets, as well as a council report once we internally have decided, I guess, what the approach would be best in terms of recommendation. So this committee would be having a recommendation to council based on what targets we're looking to set for the community as well as corporate. And once that decision is made, then we move on to milestone 3, which is drafting the plan and making a report on the plan and working on reviewing it and scheduling an open house.
So if we're working with that, I'm just trying to prepare council for 2025 budget request.
Okay.
If we had some costing, so later fall would be good for us, but we've warmed them up to it. I want them to know that you don't do this for nothing. There's a cost to doing nothing, but so I don't know what the cost is yet. We don't know, but not for the actions, but more for the information gathering. Unless we won't be into action next year, will we? Or will we?
Well, based on this timeline, if we say complete M2 before September, and then we start drafting the action plan itself, then we're getting into the actions, and then we're getting into what the document looks like, and then we're getting into the nitty-gritty. Yes, and then we're talking about budget. So if we want to prepare ahead of time, I guess we'll have to have it, sort of later in terms of what the committee would be recommended to council to approve.
And in terms of time frame, like we don't necessarily have to give 3 months for the public to respond to a survey, right? Like if we leaned into it even 1 month.
Yeah.
It's just that it doesn't have to be 3 months. You're right, but I was speaking with Sue, and her opinion is that longer the better. We can debate whether or not it's more effective after 1 month and see how many responses we get if you want to keep it open.
I just feel like people procrastinate. If you tell them like everybody that's got an opinion about climate change, get back to us in the next 2 weeks or a month, we'll hear from the people that actually have coherent opinions about climate change.
I don't know if we necessarily put a deadline. I don't know if we put a deadline on the survey just yet, but we would be announcing a survey saying that it's open to the public.
Yeah.
But I'm saying that we have to have it in by the end of the summer. It just will be open for 3 months. So there'll be periodic reminders if it makes sense. I don't know if 3 months is ideal for everyone, but that's my suggestion.
Sure. Well, we could talk about that. Yeah. Up to 3 months.
Up to 3 months, yeah.
Yeah, maybe even just set a response goal, like we want to hear from 100 or however many people, and see how long it takes to get a significant enough number. I don't know.
Would this sorry, Peter.
No, I'm.
I was just going to ask, would this survey just be electronic, or would there be options for people to do it?
So in terms of the rollout, there'd be a banner on the website when it's first announced, and it would be available on our page once that's created. There would be a paper copy for those who are not able to access it online, And I don't know if we would want to put it in locations that people more likely would be, like say different like hospitals or cafes or things like that. You know, like just to circulate it. It all depends.
Libraries.
Things like that, yeah. I haven't figured out what the appropriate length is. I don't want to bore them to death, but I also want them to understand what's being said. So that's the tricky part right now.
Communications department can probably help with that.
I think so. So that is where I'm at in terms of trying to find the next steps. And then I guess what's not on here is a report on the scope change.
Just two things. At 3:30, I'm going to slip into this room and take a call, but I'm sorry. So for me, it was just around getting, if there's a cost in 2025 that we're recommending, we've got to get it through you to Carl and into our hopper in late fall, October, November, even if it's a placeholder or something. And so if we could have a report or two before that we
October.
I want to
probably.
soften up this group because it's everybody's not as informed on climate action as the participants here, and there's other things to spend money on. So we just have to make sure we get everything we want.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so there'll be like a lot of budgetary requests, report stuff.
Yeah, and you'll have a list of grants that we've either already got or applying for. The council everybody loves free money.
That is true. Okay.
And for the survey, I thought if there were some sort of presentation and be, summarized in a short video, then whoever wants to take the survey could use that as a prototype to learn a bit more. Then I will think we'll get more useful results than just asking a bunch of questions, right?
So a video explaining the survey?
Right.
So that would be on the top page. Is that kind of what you're thinking?
Yeah.
Starring.
Oh.
I like the idea of a video. I'd add to that is, in addition to explaining the survey, explaining what we're up to. Like,
You
know what I mean? I think most people and honestly, even joining this group, I wasn't totally clear what we're up to. I feel like I just spent the past month reading all of these examples of other municipalities, their work product from this, and that was eye opening. This isn't one specific format. It's they basically allowed every municipality to do their own thing. There's some structure to it, but we could take this in a lot of different directions depending on what people want to do. And
yeah, the very first meeting, Sue and I had not a disagreement, but I wanted to know exactly. And she said we can do it and figure it out at the same time.
Yeah.
I wasn't sure.
Wasn't exactly the expression she had, was it?
It wasn't
two
quite.
so two on talk at the same time or something.
Walk at you,
Yeah, because I was wanting more, really understand what the job is and the scope of it and everything. And she said, so I got it voted.
no, fair enough. I thought that at least the assessment process would have some standardization. The idea that two municipalities can conclude, one can think that the carbon footprint from food is twice what the other one is. Clearly one of those is wrong. But I thought that there would be a standardized, this is how we assess this. But what I realized is it's optimistic to assume that they would have landed on the right choice. And because there's so many different ways to do this, and it's still such an emerging science, it's better to be able to look at 100 different good faith attempts and see which ones worked and what didn't, and then try to learn from them. It's a good system that they have here. It's just not particularly structured.
No. So we learn about some others.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the simpler we can communicate it, the better.
Okay.
Because sometimes sitting here, I'm like, wow. Right? Just numbers, that's your job. That's where you're trained. But if you're not, I think you'll get a better response from the community if they understand what we're doing in layman's terms.
Correct. Yes. Yeah. On the subject of keeping things simple, so there's the corporate carbon footprint, and then there's the rest of it. I find that confusing because corporate doesn't mean business in this case. It means the town.
The corporation.
And they don't, it's not a requirement that you keep those separate. It's an option, and they have the term that they like called divide and conquer for it. For me, it's not clear to me that's the right move. That it seems to me like if we had one number that was the town's carbon footprint, that would be an easier thing to understand than two numbers that are the town's carbon footprint.
Well, the difference here really is we have complete control over our corporate emissions.
Yeah.
And we have the ability to take actions which will change those emissions in the future, right?
Yeah.
Community-wise, we don't have the same impact. We have the opportunity to educate, inform, potentially incentivize, but it's going to be up to a lot of different factors for each individual in our community, each business in our community to reduce their carbon footprint. So that's something why we've had that mentality, keeping it separate. Because, I mean, if we decided tomorrow and council decide, well, we're going to revamp our wastewater plant and we're going to use electricity instead of natural gas, we're going to put solar panels up, we're going to put some turbines in the river, and we're going to invest $15 million, we can do that.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that would be the action, but I'm saying as an example, we can control that.
Yeah. And in terms of quantifying these things, there, like in a previous conversation, we were talking about like the differentiation between government action versus individual action. And food, there's some individual action, but almost everything else, even if there is, like, for instance, if we get people to stop idling their car, there is some emissions contractions that would be associated with that. Trying to quantify that for this purpose, like if we actually wanted to make one of the things that we do pass an ordinance where you're not allowed to idle your car, in order to take credit for it, we would have to establish a baseline of how long people are currently idling their car. And there's all kinds of things like that where the individual actions, they might be of some value. It's pretty negligible, but it's also almost impossible to count. And so almost everything that we might do for this plan really doesn't fall under the individual action, with the exception of food. It's almost everything else. It's like wastewater, the electricity grid. It's government stuff.
Garbage,
Yeah.
Well, and that's
why
what,
it's
yeah.
separate.
So with waste collection, so if we decided tomorrow we're going to collect organics and compost organics, there's going to be a cost. There's going to be the increased carbon footprint of vehicles going around to pick up organics, but we're reducing the weight of our garbage probably by 40%, the volume of our garbage probably by a similar amount, and ultimately reduce the carbon footprint of our waste collection.
Absolutely.
So there's corporate actions we can take which will impact the community as well.
Yeah, enormously. And like just encouraging everybody to go compost might actually achieve a similar goal, but we won't be able to quantify it. Like in terms of taking credit for it in the system.
We would know the weight of our garbage and the volume of our garbage. So if it's redirected to a compost, it's not going into our landfill.
True. Sorry, you're absolutely right. The ratio we could potentially quantify in terms of saying the nitrous oxide flux that's no longer happening. That would be a thing. Yeah. Whereas if it's all happening in one place, you can take a reading of it, and that's just that. Like most of the things that we can actually, like when we're looking at the mitigation things, like anything that's going to take more than like 5 or 10 points off of our score is going to be a government action for the most part, with the exception of the meat one. Almost all the other ones, they're like, yeah, just because it's challenging to quantify anything that isn't happening by government.
Okay. One of the major things too in terms of emission is your traffic light. Nobody has any control, but it has to be careful planning and so on because it runs 24 hours. Right? Yeah.
Well, I
will
will say
everywhere.
For the traffic lights, what I did find interesting actually is that for Smith Falls, the numbers don't change actually all that much because they're always on, so the values are consistent. It may cost different, but in terms of how much they use, because they're new LEDs, they're kind of consistent. It's actually incredible. Like month to month, the values don't change that much. So unless the lights are getting old or something like that, you'll see a bit of a difference. But in terms of overall changes, they're rather minimal. I think because they're relatively new, we got them to 2021, so that could also play into it.
Okay, are any more questions around the project timeline piece of it? No? All right, so moving on to grant monitoring.
Okay, I only have one update for this. So last year I applied for the edibles trees program from the community tree grants program. So essentially what that was is, so Trees Canada, they have a food grants every year, and Edible Trees program allows you to apply up to $10,000 for any sort of program that promotes edible trees in the community. Now, Heritage House, they have an apple grove, and they were looking to restore it, so we had put a grant application forward so that we can have it restored. Unfortunately, we did not get it this year. There's a lot of applications that go to Tree Canada, so I'm assuming that based on how small it was and they didn't think it maybe would have been as interesting. I'm not quite sure. I had reached out for feedback in terms of what our application can do differently, but nothing yet. That's just more of an update in terms of what grant that we had applied for, or rather myself.
Rather than a monitoring Richard Grant.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
The apple grove, how big is it?
Oh, I don't even know. In terms of a size, maybe like the full, all of this, in terms of space.
Oh.
Yeah, like it's not really big. It's really tiny.
Yeah.
Grove is the generous term. I think that it was intended to be a lot larger when it was first started, but now it's a museum, right? So I can't exactly think they were looking at expanding it, but I think they're always looking for more different kinds of trees.
Did they just need to groom it? What did they?
So it needs to be pruned. They need to, they're looking at buying different cultivars that are local to Atlantic so that they can do more of a, I guess, trees that are more, I guess, indigenous is the word I would use, so that they can, I guess, show examples of what it was like back then to be eating these kind of foods.
Oh,
Yeah.
very cool.
Mm-hmm.
The biggest waste of green space that we have is up the boulevards in our wartime houses off of Green Street. There's
Yes.
a large grass cut, and they should be just filled with fruit trees. But
I think so too. I think the reason why they're not is because the overhang on the wires.
it's short dwarf apples. They just
I'll tell you, planting of all the different options for what we can do, the planting trees option is the one I'm most excited about by a long shot. Like both the carbon farming trees, like the poplar hybrids, fruit trees, nut trees, like it protects us from storms. It closes our food footprint. It helps us with the heating. It delivers on so many different levels.
All potential actions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they're all like, and it's cheap. Like, you know, especially if like the town starts producing the trees themselves, like the cost of mitigating climate change with trees is so low.
Mm-hmm. So that's what I have for grant monitoring, and now we're at the, I guess, the roundtable.
Yeah, in terms of fruit trees and so on, Macintosh being invented in the Elgin. If we have one in Heritage House Museum, there are stories to tell. Okay,
Oh.
and also too, like Kilmarnock Orchard had one time 45 varieties of apples.
Wow.
And if you start looking at what we are trying to do at Mini Forest, even among apples, the different variety, and if you're looking at demonstration and so on, and food security, there's something that could be said.
This is an aside, but for the mini forest, what kind of trees are you planting? I don't know what the variety is. Is it just like a bunch of different deciduous trees, or like what are you looking
It's
at?
a variety.
Variety?
Actually, I remember I brought my sons when they were young, and you have a feast to see the different types and so on. I don't know whether that is a well-known fact. No, that number of varieties.
Wow.
Okay, so we'll move on to round table. Peter, do you want to start?
Okay, yeah.
Do you have any updates?
So this Saturday is going to be laying the forest floor, and Friday is a photo op at 2, and folks are looking at the proper name of that park because there was controversy. Okay, and looking then down the road, hopefully we will have treated biochar that is going to really enhance the growth.
Wow.
And I would think that is unique. Nobody else has done that so far. Okay. Then another one here, shifting now from Rio to Roundtable. The CBC's still standing will be coming to town.
Wow.
And in fact, we're talking about there are 3 shootings on the PaddleFest related things. One is we're going to provide a tour of the combined locks out of season before the canal opens, okay? Second one is that we're going to provide a mock race. And then the third one is we're going to have the Voyager canoe tug of war. And we could then involve indigenous and non-indigenous youths that way. Yeah. And the last thing is we can even get John Harris to learn how to do make a drum.
Oh, that's good.
A native drum. Okay, so those are the ones that we're working on, and hopefully within the next week or so we get some confirmation. Yeah, and that is the publicity we're adding. Yeah.
I pitched them on doing biochar. We might get a yes on that too. Who knows? It's a small town. My wife's doing the canopy portion with them.
What is CBC still standing, Peter? I'm not familiar
This
with
is
that.
what
It's
the
national-
TV Murdoch.
very popular
Murdoch,
national
yeah.
program.
Oh,
It's a comedian that goes to small towns all over Canada.
Right.
It's the most Canadian thing
you
you'll
see,
ever see.
You see this
First I've heard of it.
Murdoch mystery.
yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
George there
Okay.
is the star
Oh.
for
that's really
Still
cool.
Standing,
Okay.
and it's featuring small town.
That's awesome.
A partly comedian, partly revival and resilience.
Unique and funny stories
Right.
generally about a town. So
Okay.
Yeah.
And
It's adorable.
it's coming during Paddle Fest?
No, they're coming May 3rd to 8th. They will be shooting there. PaddleFest is on June the 15th.
Okay.
And hopefully, we'll be able to have a presence for this committee there.
Yeah.
There would be, even preamble about surveys and so on and so forth. Yeah.
Excellent.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Steve, do you have any updates? I know you're driving, but you might not be able to hear
You
us.
freeze?
Yeah.
Not the best looking picture, but yes. Maybe he turned it off and that was it.
Okay.
I know that Sue not being here told me to promote something for Climate Network Lanark. So she called it Electrify a Lanark Forum. It's going to be the Legion in Perth, and this will be on May 18th. And it'll be happening from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. And there'll be a variety of workshops, such as residential solar photovoltaics, outdoor appliances, EV e-bikes on chargers, hot water heating systems, heat pumps, home resiliency, and indoor appliances and induction stoves. So the workshops are happening at different times, I should say, but there is a forum happening on the 18th of May, from 9 to 4. Yes, so that's it.
Thank you, Sue. Sean, do you have any roundtable updates?
I don't think so. No.
Okay. Nate?
I don't think so. So I gave you like a long list of technical questions, and you very kindly went through and answered them all. Is there a method where we can share that with everybody else?
Yes, for sure. I was thinking about it, but I wasn't sure if that was something you wanted to share with everyone. Or
Yeah, I mean, for sure we certainly can share it with everybody. I don't want to give everyone a huge homework assignment. If you don't feel like you have to tear through the nitty gritty, it's a lot of technical stuff. But just in terms of as a work system, so that everyone stays in the loop.
Sure, I can definitely be available.
And I guess we kind of covered a lot of the ground there. But basically, what I asked a whole bunch of technical questions around what the specifics around doing this initial modeling and what's needed what's the different equations for nitrous oxide and methane, and how do we quantify the different things. And he went through and answered pretty much everything. So there's a lot of really good information in there if anyone wants to review it. Thank you again for doing that. That was awesome.
Welcome.
Richard, do you have any updates, even though you're not
No, I don't think I have any more. I think I have updates, thankfully.
Okay. Just from the health unit perspective, we reached out to Hastings and Kingston, KFL&A, because both of those health units have just initiated a vulnerability assessment. So really what that does is help us identify the health impacts of climate change on our local communities. So we heard about it and thought, hey, we didn't have capacity as our own individual health unit to do this, but we've approached them to see if we can jump on board with them. So they've said yes. So we will be doing that. So it'll help us identify what the vulnerable populations here are, and how we can help, with adaptation around those things, as well as what are the major climate hazards that impact our local community. So
Wow, that's pretty interesting.
yeah, so a lot of health units have been working on that across the province. So I'm excited to get working on that.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
By the way, sorry. Go ahead.
Just one thing to add is by looking at the water waste treatment, I see pyrolysis, I see exothermic reaction, I see energy released, and capturing those energy, turning them into fertilizer, and make it really carbon negative. And the opportunity to work with universities both in Kingston and Ottawa.
Is that what's happening right now?
You wouldn't know as a chemistry teacher, right? In our carbon footprint, healthcare stuff is actually very high. I don't know why that was so surprising to me, but like of the things, it's one of the big ones. It's like, I don't know if it's 10%. It's a substantial chunk of Canada's climate footprint, and I just don't know anything about where that's coming from. So if you could do any digging in terms of what that, my best guess is that there's very little to be done in terms of shrinking our healthcare carbon footprint, other than the process of making the electricity grid carbon neutral. But I don't know, like whatever, if you can find out what gases they're like.
A lot of gas heating.
I wonder whether there would be medical waste.
Yeah. Like even just how they got to that number. What did they count? What did they not count? Are they talking? Does that include garbage? Does that include the compressed gases that they're using? Is that the manufacturing of the equipment? Like, I don't know. It's a big number. Like, yeah.
Oh, definitely look into that. I know a few resources have come across my desk specifically around hospitals, and a lot of them have their own climate change action groups as well, probably because it sounds like it's very high.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'll see what I can find.
Wonderful. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, I think that's it for updates. And Tanya, did you have anything you wanted to contribute?
Oh, I'm good.
Okay.
Thanks.
All right, so the next meeting is scheduled for May 14th at 2 o'clock. And for adjournment, I move that we adjourn the meeting at 3:36.
Okay.
Seconded.
Second.
Moved by Peter and seconded by. Okay.
All in favor?
All in favor?
Thank you.
Great.
May 2nd, May 4th.